Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. Today I'm talking about the books that I've read over the last few weeks. So let's just get started. I have my first DNF of the year, and that's Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I mentioned fairly recently that I wasn't enjoying it, and that hasn't changed, so I've decided to just drop it for the time being. A lot of you will already be familiar with the story, although there isn't much of a story, to be honest, but it all revolves around the life of Clarissa Dalloway during a day in London. And she's going about her own daily chores, but also the perspective shifts to some other characters as well, and we get different perspectives. It's a somewhat interesting insight into the upper middle class of the time, and I suppose you can get some deeper reflections about relationships and a lot of other things, but I just found it incredibly tedious. Just all the preoccupations of these privileged people in terms of, oh, now she's going to buy flowers because she's got this party with all the posh people who will gather around, but oh, why did I marry the guy I married? Oh, I was really fond of the other guy as well, but I also kissed the girl when I was younger. And oh, now fetch my servant, I need to mend my dress. I just found it incredibly tedious, I have to be honest. So yeah, that was Mrs. Dalloway for me, I'm afraid. Moving on to another classic, even though it's a sci-fi classic this time, and that's Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. This is another really beloved book that a lot of people, a lot of you will already know, but it follows the story of Charlie, this very simple-minded guy who's also very nice, very likable, and very endearing in a way, who really has this strong desire to become cleverer, and he gets experimented on to enhance his IQ, and the experiment is successful. So his personality completely changes, and he becomes a sort of genius, but in the process, his personality also changes in terms of becoming a lot more condescending of other people and struggling to relate to other people on an intellectual and emotional level. I found the story incredibly original, especially for the time, and Charlie as the main character is incredibly well fleshed out, incredibly believable, even in its far-fetchedness of the plot of the story. And it touches on a lot of incredibly compelling themes when it comes to the way we build our relationships, we interface with each other, we treat each other, and how we struggle to build those emotional connections and intellectual connections with other people. And it's very moving, it's very touching, although I have to say that I had really high expectations because a lot of people told me that, oh, I cried so much with this book and so on. And I have to say it slightly let me down in terms of its emotional impact on me. It wasn't as strong as I was perhaps bracing myself for. So I really liked it, I really enjoyed it, but I have to say I didn't have that gut reaction that I was perhaps hoping for. So I ended up rating this 8 out of 10. And then because I was on holiday, there's nothing better than a mystery thriller while you're sat on the beach. So I have a couple of these. The first one is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. And I received an advanced reader copy from the publisher for this. I had sort of mixed expectations for this because on one hand, the author is incredibly famous, incredibly loved, and I know that a lot of people love a lot of his books, so I sort of had high expectations from that perspective. But on the other hand, I had heard so many people who really disliked this one book specifically. So I wasn't sure what to expect. And I have to say that overall, I quite enjoyed it. This is the story of this girl who's just lost her best friend because of a serial killer, essentially. And she accepts a lift from a stranger to her hometown. And a lot of the story revolves around this drive with this stranger, and I don't want to spoil too much. But it's all set in the 80s, the 90s, and the setting is already quite interesting and quite going for that nostalgia effect, and that kind of worked for me to some respect. But I just found it quite entertaining, quite enjoyable. It's a page turner. It's well written, even though I think he tends to over explain things at times. But the twists were quite unexpected for me, so I quite enjoyed that side of the story. Obviously, when I pick up that sort of book, I just like to be entertained and surprised, and it's sort of delivered from that perspective. Is it the best book I've ever read? Is it the best thriller I've ever read? Probably not, but I have to say that given all the negative reviews that I had heard for this one, I was relatively pleased. So I also rated this 8 out of 10. The other thriller that I read is The Dry by Jane Harper. And this is all set in this small town in Australia. And I really love the setting because I don't read a lot of Australian fiction or books set in that part of the world. So it was quite a bit of a novelty for me. So I really like that side of the story. And also, if you're into climate fiction, this also touches on that theme because, as the title suggests, there's a big drought in that part of the world that kind of brings people to desperation, and that's part of the plot as well. And the story follows this main character who comes back from Melbourne, if I'm not mistaken, to this small town where he grew up. So we get a lot of the flashbacks from his past as well, and we get these tragic events happening, and there's the mystery element, which was very well executed in my opinion, because a couple of times I thought, oh, I bet this is where it's going, and I thought it's a bit lame, and it never was what I thought. It just managed to take me by surprise as well. So I was quite impressed with the story, with the plot, with the twists, and with Jane Harper's writing overall. So I very much enjoyed it, and I rated this 8 out of 10 as well. And then to finish off, I have a couple of books from the Booker Prize shortlist. The first one is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. And this revolves around the life of this main character who's really similar to Lockwood herself. There's an element of auto-fiction in there. And the main character is very active on this portal, which sounds really similar to Twitter. And she goes around the world to talk about social media and that sort of thing. And the style of the book also is very similar to Twitter itself, where the story is all told via these individual vignettes, if you like. It's not a straight narrative, and it just jumps from between different topics constantly. And it's quite original in the way it's executed. The second part of the book also touches on some tragic event that happens to the main character, and the subject of the book shifts somewhat, and there's this tension between the social media side of your life versus the more private side of your life. I have a full review for this on the channel as well, because this is quite one of those books that I think warrants a longer discussion. It's really difficult to give my full perspective in just a couple of minutes. But overall, quite enjoyed it, even though, again, I had some reservations, especially with kind of the emotional side of the story didn't really resonate with me too much. However, I also find it quite funny and quite original, so I ended up rating this 8 out of 10 as well. And lastly, I have The Promise by Damon Galgut. And this is all set in South Africa over a period of about 40 years between the 80s and sort of recent days. And this revolves around the story of this family who's a white Afrikaans family who owns a farm and some land. And as the mother of the family is about to die, Amor, the young daughter, hears the mother making the father promise that they will leave a small dwelling within the property to the black maid who's been working for them for decades. But Amor really wants to see this promise fulfilled, but it never really is. And there's a lot of family drama that ensues, and we see time intervals are about 10 years, what happens and how the family has evolved, and the situation, the political situations in South Africa as well, alongside the family. This was really, really moving, really compelling. The characters were quite memorable, I have to say, from my point of view, but also for me, the writing, Galgut's writing, really stood out incredibly. The way the story is told, with a point of view that constantly shifts between all the different characters, changing between first person, third person, second person, breaking the fourth wall. I found it incredibly stunning. Again, I have a full review for this book because there's so much to say about it. And I ended up rating this 10 out of 10, and it's definitely one of my favorite reads for the year. I hope you guys like this video. Please give me a thumbs up. Join our Discord, the link is in the description box, and I'll see you the next time.